Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I am Andy Kiriakides, joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. How we doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm going to take a few minutes to unpack a topic that seems to come up more and more frequently, see if we can pull back the veil a little bit on the pitching evaluation process. I think when we talk to different coaches, we talk to different players, different parents, different travel ball coaches. This topic comes up a lot, and I think a lot of it is around trying to better understand the coach's point of view, and that velocity is just a starting point for this. We're going to go into more detail than this, but I think what trips people up is start playing the comp game, and I think this is where this kind of starts is, well, that guy throws 88 and I throw 87. Like, why did I not get recruited by that particular school, or why am I not getting recruited by that particular school? And I think it kind of led us to wanting to unpack this a little bit. And one, the comp game can get a little bit dangerous, but two, I think we just take a little while here and talk about it from our point of view, talk about it from the point of view of the coaches that we talk to. And I encourage everybody to go back and listen to the different podcasts with coaches that we've had on, because they certainly touch on this topic and kind of what they're looking for and what separates guy for them and the different things that they value. But let's kick it off and kind of see where this thing takes us. What do you want to open up with your coach?
Strike throwers. I don't know. You put me on the spot. That was the first thing I thought of. I think when evaluating pitching is a fickle beast, right? You know, there's every single pitching coach, every single head coach, you know, damn near every single hitting coach out there is going to value things differently, see things through a different lens, and ultimately, obviously, it ends up with the pitching coach and the head coach that decide who they're going to go after. I think what a lot of coaches have started to value, or a lot of coaches have shifted to, is that they're finding things, you know, metrically, and whether it be character or a different set of factors that go into pitchers it is that they like. And if you indulge me for a second, I'll explain. You know, I think there, with where baseball is and the amount of metrics that we have for our pitchers, it's far further along than it is on the hitting side with our pitchers. I think so. There was a point where the pendulum swung a tad bit too far over to the right, and we were talking about, you know, a lot of things that might not necessarily translate to pitching on the mound. And I think the really good ones and the ones that, you know, we've had on the podcast and hopefully guys that we have on in the future have been able to blend not only the metric side of things with the actual pitching side of things. You know, the feel for being able to throw a breaking ball, the feel for being able to make some adjustments on the mound, the compete factor that guys have. You know, is there pitchability there? And by pitchability in layman's terms, like, you know, are you a pitcher or are you a thrower? Do you possess more than one pitch? Are you just going to be a fastball guy who rears back in his max effort and tries to throw it as hard as he possibly can for as long as he possibly can, and it doesn't last that long? Or are you a guy who can pitch 88 to 91, and when you need it, run it up around 93, 94? Or are you a guy that pitches at, you know, 82, 84 and throws at 87, you know, can run it up around 87, 89? Can you throw your breaking ball in multiple counts? Right? Like, you know, those types of things from a pitchability standpoint matter, especially in the college game, because you're facing better hitters. So you have to be able to do other things to get those better hitters out than you might be able to do than you do in high school. You know, so I think the really good ones and the shift that you're starting to see, and maybe not even starting to see, that we're in the middle of, is taking the metric side of things and then blending it into how we can coach up guys to be able to use those metrics and adapt it to what it is that they're able to do personally and get them to be the best versions of themselves on the mound. Now, there's a lot of things that go into this, right? Like there's a lot that I just mentioned, but now we got to go through, your delivery. Is your delivery repeatable? Is it getting you into the right spot that's going to allow you to maximize your success? What does your arm swing look like? Some guys like to see big circles. Some guys don't mind guys that are a little bit of a shorter arm action. How big are you? Like there are some coaches out there that don't necessarily love super tall pitchers because anecdotally they can, maybe it's a little bit harder to repeat their delivery. Conversely, there's guys out there that don't love shorter pitchers. So it's all preference, and honestly, you're going off a lot of things that you've seen in the past that have found success, right? Like, Brian Fay and a handful of other guys have talked about this before, and we've fallen into this trap as coaches where you find somebody who is an outlier and you try to continually replicate that. And the hard part is, like, you continually try to replicate an outlier that might not always hit all the time. And I think that sometimes, it's you're going off your gut, things that have worked before, and honestly, something that always worked for me when I coach was, where does this guy stack up in our lineup or our pitching staff right now? Could I see him pitching on our staff right now? If I had a time machine and I had my hands on him for a year, 18 months, 2 years, however long out it is, do I think he could pitch on our pitching staff right now? And if the answer is no, then I have my answer. If my answer is yes, then, hey, this is a guy that we should probably follow up with. But I think, the velo thing, and we hear this all the time as well, I throw this X number, and that's all well and great. But it's not the be all end all of everything. Like, is there a floor? Yes, there's a floor. Are you going to be able to pitch in college baseball throwing 67 mile an hour fastballs? No. Unequivocally, no. Unless you're a knuckleballer and you want to sneak one by somebody from time to time, which you're likely not going to do. You're really not going to be able to pitch in college baseball at throwing 67 miles an hour. But if you do hit that floor at certain programs, then yeah, there's something there, and you can then off of that we get into your breaking ball, your off speed stuff. How good is it? Do you throw a curveball? Do you throw a slider? Do you throw a sweeper? What's your changeup look like? Do you have a splitter? What else do you do in order to get guys out? Because you say it all the time. This is a game of run prevention. So how do you succeed on the mound in getting hitters out? And I say this all the time on here. I said it to my team. I'll continue to say this for as long as we do this. It doesn't get easier the higher you go in baseball, right? Like, there's a reason there's only 24,000 and change big leaguers to have ever played the game in the history of the game. It doesn't get easier as you go up. It gets harder. So the pitching gets better. The hitters get better. So the hitters are better than the high school hitters. Like the 8-hole guy hitting 8, 7, 8, 9 guy hitting on a college team were probably 2, 3, 4 hitters in high school. So if you can't get the top end of lineups out in high school, you got to figure out something to get yourself better to get those guys out. And I think all of those things, and we can delve into a lot of them, you can pick the thread and we'll go. But the things that those are like, and we haven't even got into fielding your position, picks, holds, being able to control the running game, all of those things, right? But from a pure just pitching standpoint, there's a lot more that goes into it than just I throw X miles an hour.
100%. And to unpack the velo thing just a little bit, because it does. Anybody who tells you the velocity doesn't matter is lying to you, right? In the classic case that everybody likes to use is like, well, Greg Maddux. It's like, well, yeah, he's an outlier. Like, turn on the television nowadays and take a look at what guys are doing. There's a trickle down when you get into college. Like, it's not by mistake that you turn on the College World Series, and the vast majority of those guys are low to mid 90s arms. It's because that's what they have access to. There's all kinds of data that suggests that velocity is a difference maker in the pitching process. I mean, it's just that simple. If you throw 94, you have a better chance of getting people out with that same exact pitch than somebody who throws 90. The other piece of it is, too, kids throw a lot harder now than they used to. 88 is like super average velocity at the Division 1 level. And to be honest with you, you get to the really good Division 2s and it's super average velocity. And it's gotten to the point where you start getting juniors and seniors at the Division 3 level, they're all 87 to 89 if they're right-handed. So understanding that I think is really important, that it does matter. And if you're, if you're a right-hander and you're 80 to 82 right now, like you need to throw harder just to be recruitable, never mind be a college player. But once you get past that number, and to your point, so much of the data is available to coaches now that it makes it easier for them to select who they're going to bear down on. I think that's a huge part of what the data does, is that, if you're at whatever particular school you're at, based on your previous success, that the guys that are good are within this velocity range. So if you see a high school kid who's in that velocity range or close to it, that's a kid that you're probably going to, go down the path of figuring out whether he's good enough. But then you get into the other stuff that you're talking about, the size, how do they move? What's the arm swing look like? What's the body look like? And that gives you that element of projection, right? There's a reason that a lot of these guys at the high level of Division 1 look alike. It's because that's what those guys recruit. If you're University of Virginia, you don't have to take a 5'10" right-handed pitcher who throws 88 if you can get a guy who's 6'3", right? You get to choose because you have the ability to do so. So those guys at the highest levels, they can be really selective with what that profile is. They're looking for specific traits. They're looking for specific body types. They're looking for specific movement profiles. And that's going to drive what they look at. And that's what's going to separate the 20 kids who are 88 to 91 is going to be all that stuff that they're going to nitpick at. How good is the breaking ball? What is it profile like? What's his arm angle? What's his extension? What are his spin metrics? What is strike percentages? All that data that they have helps them split those hairs, but there's a floor that every one of those kids that they're going to evaluate has to get to before they're even in the conversation, right? The next thing that these guys are going to look at once they identify, all right, this kid fits what I'm looking for, whether it's Division 1, 2, or 3. Can those metrics that I'm seeing in the bullpen, that I'm seeing on TrackMan, that I'm seeing on the video, what does that look like when you get in a game? And you've talked about this. Billy from Wake Forest talked about it. Like, this isn't a carnival, right? If you throw 88 to 91 in your TrackMan bullpen and your numbers look really good, but I go to watch you pitch and you're 85 to 87, you're not 88 to 91, you're 85 to 87. So you need to be able to take that into a live environment where somebody's trying to get you out, or somebody's trying to get a hit off of you and you're trying to get somebody out. And you need to showcase a certain level of success for anybody to really recruit you, whether you're 82 to 84 or you're 90 to 91. You need to showcase that at the level that you're at, you can go out and show some semblance of dominance. There's very few kids who get recruited to play in college at any level. They don't have those games where they punch out 10 dudes in 6 innings. Like, you need to be able to showcase that you can be dominant at the level that you're at. So once they figure out the metrics add up, the body type adds up, you kind of profile within our program. Now I need to see, can you take that into the game and can you be successful against some competition, against some people that are actually trying to get some hits off you? And that's just where it starts. Because then you get into the character stuff, you get into the compete factor, you get to know the kid. You're talking to coaches, you're going to watch them play to see how they act. You're going to get them on the phone. You're going to try to understand what this kid's personality is like. Does he have what it takes to be able to compete at the level that we need him to compete at? And that just gets you, once you get past that part of it, that just gets you in the conversation with a bunch of other guys that have already gone through that process. And that's where I think it's difficult for people at times, is because they grab at certain things that validate where they think they should be. It's either, well, my velocities number adds up, or I project really good and I'm just not quite there yet. Most of these guys, especially at the highest levels, they're not looking for a ton of projection. If you're at Arkansas, I'm not taking a chance that you're going to be good enough when you're a sophomore, I need to know you can compete day one. So you need to be a lot closer to being college ready than I think a lot of people think a kid needs to be at this point. Because with the transfer portal, with the roster cuts coming up for the vast majority of college baseball, kids need to be a lot closer to being ready to contribute than they probably did than they needed to be 8 or 10 years ago, where you can maybe take a super projectable kid and hope he pops after you get him in the program for a year or two. I don't think there's quite as much wiggle room for that. And I think the competition level has gotten so high that these coaches can be really nitpicky with what they're looking for. Um, in that the difference between the kid who is 86 to 88 and the kid who's 88 to 90, that's a much bigger difference than people want to recognize. It seems close on paper, right? Well, my top end velo is as good as his bottom end velo, but if you put it in a coach's perspective, unless you do some really special stuff from a secondary pitch perspective, like you're an elite strike thrower, like you're kind of getting into some outlier topics here with the ability to cross count guys with a slider, command of more than two pitches. That's what's going to offset maybe some of the velocity discrepancy. But with the way that kids throw the baseball now, I mean, we're talking to Division III programs who are passing on guys who are 85 to 88 because they got other guys that are better. They're better strike throwers, or the breaking ball is a little bit better. Like that's the level of competition right now in the recruiting world. And I think it's important to understand what you're getting into, and it's important to understand there are a lot of variables and there's a lot of different things that are very program specific when you get into the evaluation of a pitcher.
Sure. And you just hit on a ton of them, and I think that there's
I went stream of consciousness. Apologize.
no, it's fine. I think that I think it's important to know, especially in the recruiting process, that every single, and this holds true for pitchers and position guys, right? Every single coach values things differently. There's more weight put on some things versus others, and it's all based off of the success that they've found with guys that they've coached in the past. And that, like, I know pitching coaches that there's certain things that they do not like, and they will not recruit guys no matter what they think or how good that kid might be, because that kid does something within their delivery, their arm swing, whatever it might be, that they just don't like because they haven't found success with those kids in the past. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like it's just that coach, and it's two different things, right? Like, one, it doesn't mean that you cannot play baseball at a high level. It just means that specific coach doesn't necessarily like the things that you do and doesn't feel as though he's going to want to change them for you to find success. And the other is that coach he's going to through his mind of like, okay, I've had 5, 6, 7 kids that have done this when I was younger, and I couldn't change that out of them to get them better, and it made them worse, and or they just could never make the jump when they got to me. And like, it's a good thing for you that's happening, because you're not going to develop at a rate to where you are going to find success at that school. Doesn't mean that coach is not good. It just means that's not, like, those are not things that he values or things that he's looking for that you do. And that's okay. Like, and I've had multiple conversations over 15 years of this, trying to figure this out. And like, there's been times that I've been at places and people are like, hey, what would you think so-and-so would think of this? And it's like, he doesn't like guys that throw like that. So like, yeah, he's lighting up the radar gun and doing things, but he doesn't really, he doesn't love that. And ultimately they pass, and that kid ends up going somewhere else and finding some success, but he found a better fit for him to be able to go do that. So there's so much more that goes into it than just I throw X amount. The other part, and I didn't even mention it in the first part, even though I said strike throwing, is, what is your strike throwing percentage? Like, can you Can you get strikes in the zone? Can you get strikes out of the zone? With fastballs, breaking balls, changeups, what does that look like? If you're in the zone all the time, you're going to find yourself getting hit around the yard. And that's just the nature of the beast. Can you field your position? Can you hold runners? Those are things that are valued at a very high rate in the college game. You are going to struggle to pitch if you can't do those things. And we dealt with it when we coached, and you hear everyone say it, like, you got to be able to field your position. You have to be able to hold runners. Like, could you imagine being a 1-8, 1-9 on your team? Like when you're coaching, you know what I mean? Like, think about how many times you hit your stopwatch, you're like 1-9. What's your first thought?
Unrecruitable.
Right?
I mean, you can change that, but
yes, you can.
So,
These
but
are things that are coachable.
You keep, I should say, unpitchable until that changes. You cannot throw that kid until that changes. Period.
Right, and I think that those are things that are obviously overlooked and glossed over at lower levels that aren't in college, because the running game in college, again, like when you level up, it's not easier. Like, you have guys that are now running 6'4", 6'5", 6'6". Like, a lot of teams have an entire team of sub 760 guys, like, who can flat out run. So you have to be able to mix looks. You have to be able to control the running game. You have to be able to pick. You have to have multiple picks over to first base. You have to be able to inside move at second. You have to be able to spin turn. You have to be able to do these things. You have to be able to mix your timing. And that's just not just your holding. That's being able to slide step. That's being able to knee knock. That's being able to lift and go. If you're a left-hander, you have to be like, you either have to be predetermined or you have to read, right? Like, if you're a left-hander and you're going to leg lift every time, you have to be a guy who's going to read that runner at first base. Like, I'm lifting every time, but when that guy, with the second I lift my leg and he takes off, because lefties are going first movement, I'm picking to first base. Otherwise, we just might as well put that guy on second. And those are important things in this game because, at the Division I level, and it holds true across at least Division I and III, that 50% of your games, bare minimum, are one-run games. You can climb that up to probably about, I did the numbers one year where it was like almost 80% of games were two-run games, were 1 or 2 run games. The margins are super thin, and being able to keep guys out of scoring position is put at a premium at the college level. So being able to A, field your position, and B, be athletic enough to be able to understand holds, understand mixing timing, understanding that to pick, all of those types of things matter to be able to pitch at that level. And if don't get me wrong, those things are coachable. But to your point earlier, if you want to play at a super high level, you need to have those things. You have to be really good at those things, be able to go in and compete right away to throw. Because at super high levels, they don't necessarily have the time to be able to coach all of that stuff into you over the course of 2 years just to get you on the bump by the time you're a sophomore or junior. Lower levels, yeah, man, they have a little bit more time to be able to do that stuff. But you still have to be able to show progression, right? Like, it's going to be talked about the second you set foot on campus. And quite frankly, it's going to be exposed in inter squads because it is college baseball and you're going to be in inter squads and the guys are going to know, like, yo, he's a 1-9 to the plate. Like, we can just steal the second he picks his foot up, he doesn't mix looks, or it's one look and go. Like, he looks back, I'm out, because he's already going to the plate. There's not even going to be a throw to second. And it's going to get exposed quickly. And then how you handle that. How do we get that better? How can we make sure that we can cut that down? Because generally speaking, younger guys, when they're loading and being 1-7, 1-8, 1-9 because they're trying to load and throw hard. Can you do that on a slide step? Can you do that on a knee knock? Like, what are those, like, can you still hold that velo? Because if all of a sudden you go from 88, 90 because you have to keep loading to 84, 86, you're going to get hit around. So there's a myriad of issues that start coming with it. But You can obviously still hold velo and do those things, but you need to understand how you can manage all of those things in order to A, be recruited, and B, once you actually commit and show up and you're playing college baseball, how to be better at those things so that you can play more and get the ball more.
Yeah, spot on. And those are things that you can address early on because, to your point, yeah, coaches can coach some of that stuff, and they should, and they're going to. Even the guys who are close, right? Say you're a 1.5, right? That's not ideal. You'd like it to be a little bit lower. That's a much easier thing to coach than a kid who's a 1.7 or a 1.8. And you have to address that stuff when you get to college. But if you think about it from a coach's perspective, there's so many good kids out there. Why would I take the kid that I know is a ton of work just to get him into a position where he can be competitive? Because you don't have to. There's too many good kids out there. You probably saw me buried in my phone for a second. I was trying to find something because I want to add some context to the velocity thing and the importance of the secondary stuff, right? And I think this doesn't get talked about enough. We got to get, we've been talking about maybe doing like a pitching roundtable or something. Spoiler alert. But I want to get some pitching coaches to talk about this because this is super important. And I'm going to choose an outlier because I think it drives the point home even more to hammer home the value and the importance of being able to not only throw strikes, but also the ability to throw strikes with multiple pitches and being able to do that frequently. Chase Burns, you all probably know, was at Wake Forest last year, previously at Tennessee, first round pick. I think he was top 3 pick. I think he went third to the Reds or something like that. Probably last year, probably the most dominant pitcher in college baseball. Routinely was sitting 99 to 101, would kind of average out like 97, 98 with his fastball. I just pulled some of his pitching numbers from his start against UNC in May. What do you think his four seam fastball percentage was for that game?
Strikes?
Just how many times did he throw the pitch?
He throws it 100. 72.
34.
Oh, okay.
34% four seam. He threw a cutter 37% of the time and a slider 17% of the time and mixed in a top bottom breaking ball another 8%. Sprinkled in a couple changeups. But what sticks out to me about that is that you literally throw 100. This is not hyperbole. And he doesn't throw a high percentage of four seam fastballs relative to his other pitches. If that doesn't tell you when you get to the next level that you can't rely on velocity just to get people out, I don't know what other picture I have to paint for you. Imagine if you're 88 to 91. You think you can go a game and throw 70% fastballs or 60% fastballs? The reality is, if you throw 90 in college, especially at the Division I level, you're probably throwing 40% breaking balls, maybe more than that. If you're 87 to 89 at the Division I level, you're probably a 60% slider guy. And people get obsessed with the velocity in the evaluation process, but coaches are looking for that other pitch that's going to help them because the reality is that throwing 90 doesn't scare anybody anymore. So if you're a high school kid listening to this, yeah, you need to throw harder, right? But you need to be able to throw strikes with that fastball. But if you don't have another pitch that you can routinely throw competitively off of that fastball, and ideally two, you're going to have a really tough time getting people out at the next level because velocity just doesn't really intimidate guys anymore. There's a reason that he only threw 35% fastballs because if he just threw that 98 over and over and over again against UNC, somebody in that lineup's turning that thing around real quick. So that's another layer of the evaluation is that these guys are really looking for something else besides that velocity. You need the velocity. There's a barrier to entry. But if you can't do some of the other stuff, that's what might separate a guy from playing in the ACC versus pitching in, I don't know, the A10, right? A10's got guys who walk in and they're 80, 88 to 92, 89 to 92, but they're probably not as refined from a pitchability perspective. They're probably not as refined from a secondary pitch perspective. That can be a huge separator in the process. Is that you're looking at two guys, velocity is the same. They're both 6'2". They both move well. One kid's breaking ball is a lot better than the other. The other kid's getting the nod. It really can be that simple sometimes. And having that secondary pitch that's legitimately an effective pitch is oftentimes what can tilt the scales in your favor in the recruiting process.
Yeah, I think the idea that just because you throw hard, you go out there and just blow fastballs by everybody, especially as you level up into college baseball, is a fallacy.
Yeah,
right?
you get away with it in high school.
Correct. Like, and again, like same kind of thing I was talking about with not being able to hold runners and such. When you get to college, you'll find out rather quickly when you get to college and inter squads that you're 88, 89, you can't just blow by every single guy who hits on your team, right? Like, and same thing, like it might not even be your fastball. It might be your breaking ball. It might be your changeup. And, those pitches that used to get guys out at lower levels, all of a sudden, like you leave a fastball middle, you leave a slider middle, you leave a changeup middle, like it's going to get hit, and it's going to get hit hard. Now, not everyone, it might not always be a hit, right? But it's got to start to show you something of like, I can't miss there a lot. These guys are good. Like, hey man, you might be able to blow it by the 7, 8, 9 hitter, 6, 7, 8, 9 hitter in high school. But you get to college, man, like they ain't scared of 90. And it's going to be, okay, I got to do something different. Now, are there going to be certain situations where, yeah, you can blow fastballs by people? Sure. That's going to hold true in this game all the time. But that fastball is going to have to be placed somewhere. Like, you're not going to be able to miss middle. Like, you're going to, like, you get a fastball by someone when you throw it to that inner third on a righty and you edge it on the black, like, yeah, you can probably lock that dude up or get him to swing, blow him up there and more or less break a bat, right? Or extend a fastball off the plate in an 0-2 count where he's sitting breaking ball and sees fastball and it just tails away and you can get him to swing through it. But those things are few and far between. Like that pitchability that I was talking about earlier now comes into play, where what can I do to get these guys out? And same thing, right? Like you could have guys who have breaking ball bat speed. Like, they're all out there. They play college baseball. Like, you can speed guys up by throwing them a breaking ball. And what I mean by that is, like, you can be getting guys out with fastballs, and it can be an 0-2 count, and you leave a slider out over the outer third. Like, they can get the barrel to it because that ball's not as fast. So now all of a sudden they can barrel that baseball, and you just gave up an 0-2 hit instead of like, man, he can't touch my fastball. Like, let me just keep throwing fastballs in and see what happens. Because the likelihood of you getting an out there is higher than trying to speed up his barrel. Do you have to throw them? Yes, you do. But you know what? You bury it. Get him to swing over the top of it. Back foot him. Whatever it might be. Don't leave it up where they can get the ball. But those are things that, like, and look, they happen in this game. There's a ton of times during the course of the season where it's going to happen, and then coaches are going to lose their minds. Like, why are we throwing a slider there? That kid can't hit a fastball. And I'm guilty of it just as much as anyone else who will come on this podcast and tell you that they don't do it. Everyone does it. But to make that jump is understanding that, understanding the hitters you're trying to get out and understanding what you do well in order to get those guys out. And that comes with the development of you being in college. But it all goes back to the pitchability that guys are trying to assess during the recruiting process. Is he going to, like, do I think that I can get this kid to be able to, and we interviewed somebody who I believe is coming out on Thursday, the podcast, like they say they live in the margins, right? Like, they're trying to stay out of the middle. They're living in the margins. Like, do I believe that this guy, with what we do here and how we coach, can I get this guy to be able to live in the margins and be able to find success here? And those are things that are being addressed and assessed during the recruiting process to determine whether or not they believe that you could be a guy that's going to pitch in their program. And it might be a no one program, and maybe yes at another one. It depends on what each pitching coach and the philosophy they have, what they do well in developing guys, and how they think your stuff plays metric wise into what it is ultimately that they believe you can become as a college baseball pitcher.
Yeah, I mean, the margins piece, I think gets to the next layer that because I think we kind of covered this stuff, right? And we could talk about this for days because you could get into arm slots, you can get into body types, you can get into movement profiles, you can get into projectability, right? It's not an exact science. It's very tailored to a specific program. There's certain metrics that you need to meet to be recruitable at different levels. You need to be able to do a lot of the stuff that we talked about. When we talk about the margins, and spoiler alert, the follow on to the margins conversation is character, right? And how do you react? How are you going to react in an ultra competitive environment? How are you going to take coaching? And a lot of that gets explained and kind of dug into throughout the recruiting process. And I think this is the other part of it that coaches really want to they want to see under the hood, right? They want to know what makes a kid tick. What's he going to do? Can you get a good enough feel for that kid for when he goes into his first inter squad scrimmage or second inter squad scrimmage or whenever it inevitably happens and he gets smashed around? Is that going to break that kid? Or is that kid going to come back and go, okay, what do I need to do for that not to happen again? That's the character piece that we talk about. That's toughness. That's commitment to your craft. That's how you act on the field, how you communicate with mom and dad, how you communicate with coaches, what your body language is like on the mound. These are all things that coaches are looking for, and they're gonna use that information to evaluate, is this kid confident enough to pitch at our level? Because it takes a lot of confidence to pitch in college because you're going to have bad days. I thought that was something that really stuck out when we were talking to TI, is him really trying to find in, like, is this the type of kid who is self-confident to be able to go through what he's going to have to go through, because there's these inevitable lulls, these inevitable valleys that you're going to have to climb out of, and it takes a self-confident kid. How do you act when a dude hits a double off you? How do you react when your shortstop kicks a ball? Are you a front runner? Is everything always good when you're doing well, but you can't bear down when things kind of go a little bit sideways? Like, this is stuff that coaches are going to use to split hairs, to figure out, why am I taking guy A over guy B, C, and D? And if all the stuff is created equal and you're looking at very similar profiles, they're going to take the kid that they feel really good about from a character perspective, the kid who's a good communicator, the kid who is responsive to text messages and emails and phone calls, the kid who proactively provides updates, the kid who's a great teammate, the kid who competes his butt off, the kid who's accountable. Like, those are the types of things that these guys are really trying to dive into. And this kind of gets into that multi-layer conversation of, I mean, we've gone through all this stuff, arm angles, metrics, movement profiles. Now you're getting down to the nitty gritty. And this is where a lot of those decisions are ultimately made, due to the fact that it is so darn competitive out there that these guys have a lot of dudes to choose from, and they're going to nitpick. Do they get it all right all the time? No, absolutely not. But most coaches are going to err on the side of character. If all other things are created equal, they're going to go with the kid that they feel the best about.
Well, yeah, because you'd rather, what you're getting there, right? And that's the one thing that, you'll miss on. You'll be perfectly fine missing on a guy from a talent standpoint, because, at the end of the day, look, when you're recruiting guys and you're offering roster spots, or you're giving scholarship money and you're committing them, you do believe that kid at the very least is an average player on your roster. Now, the whole point of recruiting is to continually up your average because you're going to have your guys that are above. This is the average, right? Like the guys that are above and guys are below, and then you get your average. But the whole point of recruiting is to continually build that average up, 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 so that those bottom guys are now, they're the average guy from 2 years ago, and it keeps building up. So if you're confident enough in offering that kid a roster spot or a scholarship and saying like, hey, worst case scenario, he is an average baseball player in this program. The hope is obviously that we develop him into something that is going to be an above average player. You'll be fine if that kid doesn't necessarily develop where you would like him to from a development standpoint, if he checks the box on all the things you just talked about. The character, the toughness, the being able to handle adversity, all of those things, because you know exactly what you're going to get. And you know that being able to have the communication and the conversations with the kid on where he's at, what he needs to do, or hey, like just haven't been able to make the jump. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to give you the baseball. You just might not be pitching in super high leverage situations, right? Like you might be throwing in a game where you're up or down 3, and the first sign of trouble, you might be out. And there's so much that goes into this game. But my point is that there's the character piece, the communication piece, the confidence, the self-assuredness, the ability to be able to do things that are handle things that are going to be tough, because it's going to happen at some point in your career. And if you can handle those and do a really good job that way, coaches are going to be perfectly fine if you maybe don't get to the point that they wanted you to be, because you're still going to be, the hope is that you're still an average player. And you check all the boxes here, he's going to be able to, he's still going to be able to help us win somewhere with what he's capable of doing. He's not hurting us in any way, shape, or form. Where if you don't check those boxes and you can't take criticism, you can't be coached, you can't do those things, then that's where it becomes a problem, where you might find yourself not with a roster spot and in the transfer portal doing things. And those are things that, both coaches and players should want to avoid on the front end.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I mean, there's so many different things that matter in this process. And I think that's what makes it difficult. And it's exactly why we try to take 45 minutes to talk about this stuff. And so we could talk about this forever, but it's a veiled process. And a lot of times, because of social media and because of the ease of quantifying it, we boil down evaluation and value to simple numbers that either validate or don't validate where we sit in the grand scheme of things, and not knowing that there's quite a bit else that goes into that evaluation. It's not just about velocity. It's not just about how big you are or how small you are, but there's a lot of layers to this. And if it was a cookie cutter process, this would be easy, but it's not. Guys have types. Guys value certain things. Different programs play at different levels, and therefore their criteria is going to be different. But I do think the one thing that doesn't change, and it doesn't mean that there's not kids out there that are really tough to coach and may not be accountable and coachable and some of the things that we like, but that's probably the only consistent thing in this process, is that once a coach figures out that they think you're good enough to pitch for them, they're going to try to nail down the other part of it, right? It's the conversation we have with coaches inevitably for every single kid and family that we work with is, okay, I saw him. He's as good as you guys said he was. Now tell me about the kid. That never changes. All the other stuff, not that it's a crapshoot, but you could have guys in the same conference who have 10 different opinions on the same kid. That's just how the evaluation process works, right? If everybody saw through the same lens, like Mike Trout isn't the 22nd pick of the draft. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the kind of stuff that, it's a lot more ambiguous and it's a lot more variable from school to school. But that character piece and and the accountability and the off field stuff, that doesn't seem to change in all the years that we've done this, and all the coaches that we talk to, and all the times that we've recruited kids. Is that is one thing that has reigned true, is that is an important piece of the process.
Yeah, you want to know that the kid that you're recruiting, at the very least, can have the ball in a super meaningful game. It is what a lot of it can boil down to. And there's a lot of things that can tip you off to that, but you want to be recruiting guys that, if you are going to a super successful program, that they want to know that you have the confidence to be able to have the ball in that big spot. And there's a difference between wanting it and actually going and doing it. But like, those are the kids that you ultimately want. Like when I was at RPI, it was the Sean Conroys, the Jared Jensens, the Brendan McNerney's, the Chris Palmeros, the Eric Zekas, the Alex Valleys, the Ryan Yerbys and Chris Gromes. Like, those were guys that you continually tried to chase from a character standpoint, because they were not only really good baseball players, but they had the confidence in themselves that they wanted the ball in huge spots. And that's where you start to become good, when you have a staff of guys that legitimately want the ball and are upset when you have to come get them out of the game. Not necessarily like, yeah, they're probably mad at me when I would come out and take the baseball, but at the same hand, like, they're more mad at themselves. Or, maybe they're super happy and they don't want to give the ball up because they want to take it to the end, but they know that they can turn it over to another guy who wants the ball just as bad and is fresh and get outs and can shut the door. But you want to, like, as a coach, you want to check those boxes. And we did in the recruiting process of of how we went about doing that and getting those guys in, it reigned true when I coached. It still reigns true on this side of the fence, where, that inevitably the conversation turns to tell me more, and I think the other thing too, and this is probably a podcast for a different day, but the communication that kids have with their coaches, whether it be at their high school and travel ball coaches, and keeping them up to date on what it is they're doing as well. Because I think, and the best way to describe this, especially with pitching, right, is that you have a high school coach and a high school pitching coach likely that, think one way. And then you have a travel coach and a travel pitching coach who think another way. And you have your own pitching coach, maybe multiple guys, whatever it might be. And everyone, like, the college game, there's only X amount of hands that are on a guy getting them better. Like, generally speaking, it's just the pitching coach, maybe the head guy if he's a pitching guy, or, whatever. But there might be a guy that you throw with when you go home over winter break, and, hey, I've thrown with him my whole life. Okay, just let me know how everything's going. Want video. The high school level, there's so many hands on guys and in the pot trying to get guys better. And I think sometimes, and I found this towards the end of my career, you call a high school coach and it's like, hey, what do you think about this guy? And it's like, well, I only see him during the season. And it's like, is that a red flag? But then I have to call the travel coach, and it's like, yeah, no, that kid's in here 5 days a week, working out, throwing his bullpens, on a complete throwing program, lifting, doing all these things. And it's like, what's going on there? And then you call his pitching coach, or the guy he throws with, his pitching guy. And it's like, yeah, no, he's dialed in, man. He does everything it is I asked him to do. And I think it's just a lack of communication at the lower levels, especially with arms, to be able to kind of understand where guys are at. So, if that sounds like it could be you, just do a better job of communicating with everyone what it is that you're doing, so that when college coaches do call, it's a 2 phone call process of like, hey, what do you got? Great kid, competes, works out. Like, hey, he doesn't work out with our high school team all the time, comes when he can, but like, I know he's working out 5-6 days a week, throwing, lifting, running, doing all the stuff he has to do. Like, and when he shows up, he does everything I ask him to do and more. Like, A+ kid. And then I could make one more phone call, and I feel really good about that recommendation from those 2 guys. So, I think that that's, especially with arms being recruited, I think that that's something that is important, that you need to keep everyone at the high school level updated with what you're doing and how you're doing it, so that when they do get called eventually, well, if they do get called, they can give you a really good recommendation on how hard you work and what you're doing.
100%. The communication pieces cannot be overstated for a variety of reasons, which you hit on, but over communicate and never hurts, especially with pitchers, especially during the off season. You get into the summer, you need to communicate. You need to make sure you stay healthy. You need to make sure you're thrown on schedule. You need to make sure that you're doing things that are going to put you in a position to be successful. And if you don't communicate, it's not the coach's fault when that stuff doesn't line up. So take accountability for that. Anything else you want to add, Coach?
No.
All right. Well, we talked about a lot. There's probably a lot more to talk about, and I'm sure we'll get to it at some point, either via interview or another podcast. But I think the big takeaway here is that the evaluation process is far from straightforward, but there are some things that are controllable, and there's a lot of things that are important to understand as you go through this, and just be aware of these different pieces of the puzzle, and it'll make it a lot less stressful, and it'll give you a much better understanding of how this whole process works. Thank you for listening, everybody. Talk to you next week. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.